I'm Michael Bungay-Stanier. This is Change Signal, the podcast where we cut through the blather, the BS and the noise to find the good stuff that works in change. If you're a transformational leader and you're looking for modern change mastery, this is the place to be. There are some people, thinkers, writers, academics, who I think have a gift of being in the future and bringing the future back to us. And I think one of the very best of these is my friend Rita McGrath. So we're going to dig into a change conversation with Rita. Rita, thank you for being here.
Oh, it's a delight to be here with you, Michael, as always.
As always. I've always enjoyed my moments with you. For people who incredibly don't know who you are, I mean, how do you introduce yourself these days?
Well, I'm Rita McGrath, a longtime faculty member at Columbia Business School, and I've been working for many years at the intersection of strategy and innovation.
Yeah.
And lately, those two fields have come banging into each other with sometimes astonishing consequences.
Right. And what are the names of some of your best known books? Because you've written a bunch.
Yeah, well, my very first one was called The Entrepreneurial Mindset, and that was back in the 90s. I mean, that was how organizations need to learn to think like habitual entrepreneurs. But probably the first breakthrough one was The End of Competitive Advantage, which made the argument that in strategy, we need to stop thinking about advantages as being these like long-lived things. That they have a date stamp,
moment.
right? You know, and
they're like a yogurt in a fridge.
right, exactly.
Yeah. Knowing that you sit and you see organizations and you think about how they're facing the now and the future, I'm curious to know what you're thinking about change now. What's different from maybe 5 years ago?
Well, I think a number of things have come together to create a sense of urgency among leaders about change. And the pandemic, I think, did a couple of things. It taught us what we're capable of in terms of massive mobilization of resources to make something none of us thought was going to work. I mean, that was an astonishing discovery. But I think it also revealed the dark underbelly of that, which is how fragile those things are and how leaders can, intentionally or not, get in the way of a change effort. So I think the overall aha for me is that we have to stop thinking about change as the weird thing and normal as the normal thing, right? And we've got to start thinking about change as the normal thing.
Right, normal status quo's left the building, and now change is just the thing. So as you're working with senior leaders, what guidance are you giving them? What coaching are you giving them to understand and adapt to change is just the way it is now?
I encourage them to really look and be very candid about how the environment around them is shifting. And for many leaders, that just starting there is hard.
Yeah.
So imagine you're in the movie business, and now you've got this wonderful actress called Tilly, who's a complete AI out of nowhere, right? If you're a leader of a Hollywood studio, Tilly is not good news.
No.
But if you're going to be honest with yourself and if you're going to lead an organization to a state that's going to be able to accommodate that kind of disruption, you need to be honest about it. So I think the first thing I try to get them to understand is let's be very honest about what is actually going on. And once you've got that, then you can say, well, is that future going to be the way the past is? Or are we looking at something that's a change? And even more, are we looking at something that's a truly disruptive change? And people don't understand what disruption really is. They think disruption is anything that's a big change.
Right.
And maybe, but there's a very specific type of disruption that I'm trying to get leaders to really think about now. And that's when something that used to be complicated is made easy.
Right.
And something that used to be really expensive is made affordable. And if you put those two conditions together, what you find is the kind of change that wipes out industries, vaporizes value chains, completely changes where value lies in your ecosystem.
Right.
And if you are not willing to be honest about that, you're going to have a very difficult time getting the organization to now mobilize to do what it needs to do for its own survival.
How do you hold these folks in place for them to see more clearly what's going on?
Myself personally?
Yeah.
Well, the fact that they're meeting with me means they have to make time on their calendar.
Right. Yeah. That's a good start.
I'd say probably 8 times out of 10, a huge piece of the initial value I provide is because I'm coming.
Yeah,
It's 2 or 3 hours or 4 hours or however many it is to really break away from your email, get out of the other meetings you have, break away from the day-to-day, and we're going to now sit down and think about the future of your organization. So I'll give you an example. One of the things I try to get companies to think about is what arena are we really competing in? When an arena is, as opposed to an industry, right? An arena is some pot of addressable resources that you're contesting for, that's necessary for your survival, but that others also are interested in and that other solutions might be fighting for. So Netflix very famously has said they always considered their primary competition to be sleep. So I try to get leaders to think about what is their arena really, because the thing that's going to take you out is not other players in your industry. It's somebody coming out of left wing with some new capability or some new thing. And I think the Tilly, story is a really good one, which is, and you can go into shock, you can go into stasis, or you can say, wait a minute, this is a change in the environment. Yeah. How do I think about this? Is this something I should embrace? Is this something I should work around? Is this something I should begin to incorporate in what I'm thinking of doing? Because the thing you can't do with the disruptive change is sort of put the genie back in the bottle.
Right.
It's not
go la, pretend it's not happening.
Well, you do it for a while, but it's not going to be very functional.
So what do you notice as characteristics of the leaders and the leadership teams that are able to not get paralyzed or not move into denial, but actually go, okay, we should never have invited Rita into the office. That was a terrible decision. But now that we're seeing something, we're going to move on that.
Yeah.
What's the characteristics that allow people to act?
Well, I call it being discovery-driven as leaders, and that has a little bundle of capabilities. Yeah. So the first one is genuine curiosity.
Right.
So being open to saying, this may not be the greatest news of all, but I should at least go learn about it, right? So being curious, being willing to take in disconfirming information, often from sources you don't often hear from. So the guy on the loading dock who's suddenly noticing that supplies are coming in from a country he's never seen before. The person answering customer service calls who says, well, nobody ever asked about that before. Inviting them into your process, really. So getting that sort of really on the ground understanding, being very connected to what I call the edges of your organization. And
it's almost like the weak signals in the organization where you're like, okay, that's just a whisper, but it's an interesting whisper.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And now that could, and I think we often talk about change in the negative. Yeah. It could be positive as well.
Yeah.
So a great story that I think is illustrative of this kind of thing is Vas Narasimhan, who's the CEO of Novartis, is also a scientist. So he's a trained medical doctor. And in my opinion, that could be one of that company's biggest secret weapons, because he hears things that somebody who doesn't have that medical training wouldn't have heard. So the story he tells, and he told me about this, he said he was at a conference or something, and one of his scientists came up to him, all excited about advances that were being made in what are called radioligands, which are tiny little particles with little radioactive things in them. And the thing that they can do that other treatments can't do is they can absolutely fine-tune target cancers, like prostate cancers.
Right.
Something about the way this scientist was talking kind of got his attention.
Yeah.
And he set up a follow-on inquiry. And then they said, whoa, this is an entirely new therapeutic area. We'll start with things like prostate cancer, but it could be big.
Yeah.
So they very rapidly executed a series of acquisitions of other radioligands companies, have put them under the Novartis wing, and now that company is literally a leader in what could be an enormously important brand new therapy area. So just amazing, but it all comes together, and that's what I think the positive view of change is.
What have you noticed in terms of people at the top of the house and their ability to, understand the shifting world, understand that change is something that they now need to act on rather than just try and avoid, but then engage their organization in that? What does it take to be a great leader of change and transformation?
The sense that you're really connected to the organization. So I'm doing this research right now on what I'm calling inventive strategies. So how do companies create the conditions under which they can invent their futures, basically. And when I first started this research, I expected to find that the leaders would be this old Silicon Valley prescription, hire the best people you can and get out of the way. I found completely the opposite.
That's so
now, I
interesting.
did not find command and control, not at all. What I found was incredible amounts of rich dialogue, problem solving, arguments, back and forth, getting the best out of people. And these leaders are members of the decision-making teams. Sometimes they're the ones that make the actual end decision. Sometimes they don't, but they're very deep into the details in a way that is not micromanaging. And I think this is where people get it mixed up. I'm not telling you what to do. What I'm doing is participating in a collective thought process. And that's what I think the really great ones are doing.
I mean, Rita, it's really making me think about one of the consequences of AI is how it gives you an option not to get into dialogue with other people. You get into dialogue with an agent. And so even though it feels like you're making progress, you're actually a little bit isolated and a little bit alone. What coaching, what guidance would you give people who are listening to this around what it takes to get into those type of rich conversations, not micromanaging, but a way where there's a kind of a tension and a friction and exploratoriness that seems to be paying dividends?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is that people need to have respect for each other. You need to create a context in which you genuinely believe an idea could come from anyone. It could be a junior engineer, it could be a recent college grad, and then creating the space for those different voices to be heard. And sometimes it's quite formal. So there's some leaders who will say, okay, we're going to have everybody come into the room. Here's the proposing question. What's the best way to fill in blank? And we're going to take 2 minutes silently, and everybody's going to write down what they think. Then we're going to go around the table, hear from everybody. And when you do that, what you do is you're creating the space for everybody's voice to be heard, and then you can commence upon the dialogue. Other times what you'll have is a prepared document. So Amazon is very famous for having these 6-page dialogues. And someone's gone to the trouble now of thinking this thing through in details. And you come into the meeting and the first 20 or 30 minutes spent just silently reading. And then you pick up on the dialogue. So I think there's different ways different leaders structure these things, but what they have in common is you're not just letting sort of sloppy human dynamics take over where all you're hearing from is the loudest people or the highest powered or the most influential. You're creating spaces where multiple diverse viewpoints can be represented.
That's fantastic. Perhaps connected to that is a question around, my hypothesis is that part of the organizations that have a chance to grow and be successful are ones that allow agency to spread within their organization. People who have a sense of ownership and responsibility, an ability to make choices, an ability to navigate the consequences of those choices. Is there any guidance you can share around the people you've seen to do a great job at kind of increasing agency in their organization?
So I think there's a whole set of practices that you can use. So I think the first thing is being very clear about what are we all trying to achieve here, right? Very clear about the mandate. But very also flexible about how you're going to meet that mandate. So one of the companies I've studied, for example, is a South Korean financial tech company called TOSS. So here we Google things. In South Korea, they toss things. And so something like 25% of the entire population has this app on their phone. And it began as a financial transactions app, and it's now grown into all these other areas. And what their CEO will talk about is, he said, we're very tightly aligned on mission. Very tightly aligned on mission. Everybody's absolutely clear what we're trying to accomplish, what good looks like, what success would look like. We're really, really clear on that, but we're very loosely coupled in how we go about that.
That's
so
fantastic.
It's creating that loose coupling is what you want. So let me give it a specific example.
That's great.
So TOSS has, as you might expect, a YouTube channel, and it's all about, the stuff you'd expect. How much to save for retirement, and what do you do with your, pension money and all that kind of thing. But then someone at TOSS had this idea. They said, wait a minute, there's a whole other side to money, and it's lifestyle. So it's how does money fit into celebrity? How does money fit into sports? So sort of the fun and gossip column view of money. And they set up that YouTube channel, and both YouTube channels work. There was no permission needed to create that second channel. TOSS's position is try it. If it works, awesome. You'll get more resources, you'll get more people, we'll go into it. It doesn't work, we'll shut it down. No consequences. Now, in a typical hierarchy, right? the YouTube czar would have been the YouTube
exactly. It'd be
czar.
8 levels
The
of
second
sign-off.
thing never would have gotten seen the light of day. And they would have missed out on the opportunity to tap into a whole different consumer community. Because the guys that want to know how, Taylor Swift handles money are not the same people that want to learn about how you plan for your retirement necessarily.
There's a pretty minimal overlap in the Venn diagram there. So part of what that brings up to mind is, if you're giving people a loose coupling on how they do things, it just means there's a bunch of things that are going to be tried and they're not going to work. How does an organization, how does a change team build capacity to absorb quote unquote failure like that?
Well, I think what people don't understand about failure is it is the dominant form. Most
Thank
of the
God you're
time.
telling me that. That's the story of my life. Is like a vast number of failures with an occasional peak of success.
Consider this your therapy session, Mike.
Thank you.
No, most of the time failure, and I think a lot of it comes down to how we define failure, right? So in organizations, we tend to define anything that doesn't meet the hopes that we had for it as a failure, when I think that's a wrong way of looking at it. I think what you need to think of is failures, not even as failures. It's a hypothesis that wasn't supported. And so the more you can think about it that way, I think the better. Amy Edmondson, of course, talks about intelligent failures, which is we have to try it. We don't have the answer. So unless we try it, we can't learn. And then there's some supporting infrastructure you can put around that, right? Which is, I call it a contract for intelligent failure. So we had a clearly defined hypothesis. We had a clearly developed test to see whether it was borne out or not. We had the ability to determine causally what the issue was. It gave us a conclusive result in a certain amount of time. We can then share that result with others so people don't have to repeat the same mistake twice. And we're not seen as having detracted from something the organization really cares about. So you can actually document that. I mean, you could put that in an actual contract for intelligent failure. The other thing I think that is important to know about failure, and again, in organizations, we develop amnesia about these things. So you'll have a venture, it gets started, it looks promising, it was maybe the right idea, but wrong execution, wrong time, wrong team, the technology, ecosystem, something went wrong. And then, so that team leaves, the thing kind of gets swept under the rug, nobody ever talks about it again, but somebody kind of looks at that history. And some years later, the idea resurfaces, it appears again. And this has actually been studied quite a bit. And the conclusion is that many things that eventually ended up as successes had their seeds in things that didn't work out.
That's really great. Before I ask you a final question, for people who want more about you and your work, your many great books, I know you're working on a great new book at the moment, which I'm excited about. Where do they find you?
Well, the best place to start is my website, which is ritamcgrath.com. So that's pretty straightforward, and that'll take you to podcasts. That'll take you to written blogs that I do, as well as summaries of speaking and press accounts and everything. That's sort of our central gathering place. I have a regular publication that I publish on Substack, as well as LinkedIn, as well as Medium.
And I subscribe and read that, and it's terrific.
Lovely. Thank you. And then we have a podcast series that's on YouTube, so that you can follow that. So there's lots of places to sort of tap in.
A final question. What needs to be said that hasn't been said yet in this conversation between you and me?
I think one of the biggest things that leaders can help their organizations with is turning fear into excitement in some way. And people are really afraid right now. People are afraid for their jobs. They're afraid for unstable geopolitics. They're afraid for the economy. And so how do we? And fear is, it's not a productive emotion. It gets in the way of clear thinking. It causes people to freeze. It's not helpful. So one of the best things leaders can do to help people deal with that is, I call it absorbing uncertainty. So saying, look, the world may be going crazy, but just for today, here are the assumptions you can believe in. Here's what we're going to operate on. It may change tomorrow. We both understand that. But here for today, here's this little puddle of, calmness you can count on. Clarity that you can count on. Here's what you can count on from me. And then I think the message that we've got your back. Because one of the things people are afraid of is making a mistake. And in uncertain times, you're almost always going to make a mistake. So make that okay.
Rita, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. It's always a pleasure.